Thank you so very much for joining me today. I am so happy that people are going to get to share some time with us. And I was wondering if you would start out a little bit about who you are and where you come from.
That you're here, and I'm so happy.
Sorry, that was the echo.
Will you ask your question again, please?
Yes, would you please share who you are and where you come from?
Okay. Deep questions, actually. So my name is Stephanie Zhong. If I'm meeting you all for the first time, hello. And in my current life today, I am a storytelling coach for mission-driven entrepreneurs and for change makers. I'm also a writer. I'm also a bonus mom of two amazing sons who are almost grown. They are 21, 22. And where I come from is a lot of different places, to be honest. So I was born in Illinois, grew up in Philadelphia, and then went to college in Indiana, where I had my first cross-cultural experience I didn't realize, which was so cool, in the Midwest. I live in Los Angeles, and home is really where I am, is what I've learned, because I've lived in different countries and places, and I had chased the question, where do I come from and who am I, for most of my life. And now I realize it's like a turtle. I am someone who is me. My home is me. The people I'm around in the moment is me. Yeah. So that's maybe the easiest way I would answer that question, Missy.
I love that so much, because one of the reasons I really wanted to have this conversation with you, is because you and I were just chatting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we ended up talking about was how we address the oppressed and the oppressor within us. And I was wondering, because I think what had happened was all those terrible murders of Asian folks. And it was so horrible and so horrendous. And I was wondering, in the context of that question, because I think it's such an important question.
Yeah.
How have your many identities shaped you throughout your life?
Well, I'll start by just sharing what some of those identities are. And I realize that as a person, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, right? I see my identity as, like, these days, a multidimensional diamond where you've got all these different facets. The more facets you have, the brighter you shine. This is what, when I coach people, this is what we do, is we go through the stories, not just of our work, but all different parts of our humanity, and find that combination. For me, so I am the child of immigrants. My parents came from Taiwan in the 60s, and they came over as grad school students. And so I started out trying to make sense of this East-West dynamic that I grew up in. And I, when we lived in Philadelphia, I started out in a really, really mixed neighborhood and in a really, really mixed school. And then we moved into a historic Philadelphia suburb called Plymouth Meeting. It's a very Quaker name.
Wow.
And it was around the time of, the bicentennial, and everything is named after pilgrims and things like that. And the school and the neighborhood was just predominantly white and predominantly, Italian, Irish, Catholic. And I really, at that point, was one of 3 kids who looked like me in my elementary school. So it's like a series of different identity, what I used to think of as crises, but they're just like these mashups, that make you ask yourself who you are. And my parents, even though to me, they were super duper Chinese, and I was a kid that had, would notice these challenges between like who I am as an American in my identity, and the whole myth of individualism. And it would just kind of really just collide with a lot of these like Confucian values I was growing up with in terms of like community. And my parents also told me that they were a cross-cultural marriage when they looked Chinese to me. So getting back to the oppressor oppressed, and where I've realized how these things played out in me, is that beginning with my parents and my grandparents and my ancestors, I didn't know until I lived in Asia in my 20s, of the history of the, I have a little smidgen of Japanese. The Japanese had occupied, massacred, and, took over my dad's people in Taiwan, and my mother, who had fled the communists and in China, that the Chinese side of my mom's family was suppressed and kept secret. So my mom actually had a name that was Japanese in its flair. And when she was at school, she changed her name when she was told to change her name at 6, so that people would not know that we had some Japanese ancestry in us at a time when it was very violent and brutal between Japan, who were the oppressors, and Chinese people. And then on my dad's side, when it's interesting because they're both Chinese, but the mainland Taiwan divide, my mom's people in mainland China, when they fled the communists, then occupied my dad's indigenous Chinese people. So my dad was actually a second-class citizen to my mom's people. They're all ethnically Chinese. Like I said, I didn't understand any of this. So their marriage people were against their marriage. So people had been against marriages in my lines of family, because of like violence, occupation and oppression. And I did a lot of research last year. I think a lot of it was actually brought up by during the pandemic, the other pandemic of discrimination against Asians. So I started asking a lot deeper questions in my family and just realized that. And then the oppressor oppressed in the sense of being a woman, being Asian American in America, and having experienced through my life different forms of marginalization and internalized racism in my own head, right? So those things were like duking out with each other inside.
Wow. So fascinating. I just think it's such I think it brings a richness to the way we tell our stories when we think about it in those terms. I just think it's so fascinating. And it's not a conversation that we have often at all when we talk about white supremacy and racism and indigenous issues and Asian issues and Black issues.
Yeah.
LGBT issues. Like we just don't. Oh, I hope all the people get inspired to go there.
Yeah, and I want to say that too, some of the conversations have been super rich over the past year because I do this storytelling work, and because a lot of people I work with are people who are tackling issues of racism, sexism, white supremacy from different angles, be it that they are white. I have one person who grew up Afrikaans in South Africa and under apartheid, and she was white, but someone who has been dedicated her whole life, to dismantling white supremacy. And we talk about how, it's the inner conflicts are the ones I want to be liberated from. Right. And so it's like the oppressor that's telling me one thing, like, you don't matter, or in this moment, blah, 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 you're not worthy. Who are you? And even going further to like say mean things about the other parts of my identities, right? And then the other parts that are resisting and fighting against that. And I realize that that's where my silence, when I've been silent, I'm curious for other people who are watching this, if there's a piece of that, if you feel like that conflict, when we realize we've all lived in these systems. So if we, in order for racism or sexism or ableism or anything to exist, it means people have to buy in at some level, at some really unconscious level, to like uphold the system. And so it's like watching those conflicts inside myself and reconciling those.
Woo!
Come on, right?
Yeah.
And that I have privilege in place, so it's like I'm marginalized in certain places, but I'm a cis female, I'm straight, I'm college educated, I have privilege over here, right? And then I've got these crazy cross-cultural things where there's like wars and massacres and stuff in the ancestral line of people battling, and then the things that we face today, and then all the other, intersections, because I'm a mom of two sons who, were ethnically different. They are white. And then, I have one son who has special needs and another son who is gay. And we all it's being a mom in this context is so like textured and layered as well too, right? And you end up asking yourself a lot of questions about how your identity can, like your identities can, like, in other words, all these different identities play together. And it's a difference about, in my head, like, well, it's a little improv and it can sound like great jazz or it can sound like a bunch of noise. And, my job is to try and understand myself enough so it sounds a little more like jazz.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's so good. Matthew Dankla says, coming in late, glad to be here. Do we need to have a new shirt that says silence equals privilege?
Oh, yes.
Only partially kidding.
Right? Only partially kidding.
Yeah. Why do you think we are so obsessed as humans with categorizing people into categories?
Well, I looked up the word identity right before we hopped on today, and I was surprised. I'm surprised how many words I actually don't know the definition to. And one of the things that I noticed about the definitions, it was all about difference, actually. About I can't remember the exact thing about what makes us different. And I think that for me, I've heard, I think part of it is we still have a lot of primal, prehistoric, or whenever, biology, right? Yeah. It's so primal. I don't even think it's in this level of like our humanity that we're still ingrained to fear something that's different, something that might hurt us. And it happens at such a nonverbal and such an instantaneous unconscious level, right? And I wonder to myself, in evolution, when will be that time when, as human beings, we know we're ultimately safe? We're not going to be eaten by animals or right? Yeah. And so I think that self-preservation piece, I'm not a scientist, but that piece, I think, has trained us, or instinctively it's safer for you to just assume, if you had to make an assumption, that difference is unsafe. My whole life experience tells me the opposite, but it's a cultivation of those experiences, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you were saying before about I can't remember exactly the way you put it, but you were talking about upholding these structures, right?
Yes.
Like, it's all
being
about
complicit in that, because it means we have to mentally buy into it on some level.
Right. Oh, so good.
Right? I hate that, but it's kind of true.
No, it's true. And this is why I want to be having these conversations, because I want to push us to think, strategically and think outside our box about how we talk about identity and how. So what do you wish people understood about identity formation from your perspective?
So my perspective, my lenses that I come into this as is one, being passionate about stories my whole life, and stories as the opportunity for us to claim our being, our value, and our worth, and understand the stories that we have absorbed, right? That have been inscribed on us, that make us believe otherwise, and finding the truth in there. Yes. The other thing I'll say is that, as an Asian American, I'm an Asian American who also didn't fit the mold within the stereotypes of that. And so my whole life, like my parents were philosophers. They studied death and dying, and they were bohemian back where, in their schools back in Asia. We do not have people who, all the model minority myth things are a little bit blown up in our family. We're not about math. We're not about science. Nobody pushed me to get great grades. They wanted me to explore life and, blah, blah, blah. And then for me, the other key piece is that, so we always felt when we could find communities where people looked like me, we voted differently. There was all kinds of things that were just different. So I didn't feel a sense of solid belonging amongst any of my identities that I mentioned. And I've always been in this in-between place. Right. So the way I look at identity is I have really understood now that having a foot here or a foot there in most places, and this is true everywhere. When I was working out of college, I ended up in a corporate finance training program as like the only, I'm pretty sure, English African American studies major there, right? So everywhere I am, and maybe I unconsciously planned it this way, I don't know, but it's that feeling of I'm always the person coming from left field. But I'm the and what that kind of got me to do was both look for places of common ground quickly, and also be fascinated by difference. So when I say this, then for me, as far as the identity piece and what I wish people, what I wish really deeply that we could do in terms of our identity formation is that I do believe, I wish that we could make this space an opportunity throughout our lives to understand our story, that we have these different identities, and that the multiple identities actually give us this resilience and ability to learn, grow, and connect with so many more people than we ever believed possible. But we will fear things until we can shift the story inside ourselves.
And it goes back to that many facets, like the idea where all these different facets, and we have been trained by people in power and by the patriarchy and by these structures that that those facets are dangerous.
A box, right? Yeah. So even these conversations I've had with friends of mine, you know, who are racialized as white in our society, and realizing it. So my students who are white or people of color, it's been just this amazing process where week to week, we mine different dimensions and what I call the hidden gems of our story. And our gems are like diamonds. They are cultivated deep under the surface, under intense heat and pressure. So this idea that our hardships and things, like even the idea that when I hear even my white friends say, I don't have any culture because I'm white, it's like, okay, that got completely monolithed out. But I can tell you, right, like just when I said I was growing up in communities where my friends were like Irish descent or Italian descent, or my husband is white and his mother came from Ireland off the farm and had a pet pig, and his dad was Italian, and talking about when the get-togethers, how the Italian Americans and the Irish Americans have different like ways of expressing emotion and humor, you know, and how, you know, so I feel like we really deprive ourselves of so much color and texture in our stories, you know, and just even our experiences.
Do you think that that's really the strength of understanding our multiple identities, is that it allows that color and texture to come out?
Yeah, so this is something, like I said, it's so interesting that I'm really excited that in the last 2 years, I've moved into this space of helping people crystallize their multidimensional story, right? And that it's something I've wanted to do all along and organically have. So, I mean, what's interesting to me, and I think what I've believed from the time I was, I don't know, 7, is I was one of those people that strangers would tell their life stories or their secrets to. And I was really shy. So, right. Okay. So, it like used to freak me out that people would do that. But then what would happen over and over again is my own biases of whoever's sitting next to me on the bus, or what I might assume about somebody by the way they're dressed or their age or their, blah, blah, blah. And then they'd start telling me stuff. And it's like my mind, it would just like blow up. And when I hear people's stories over and over again, my whole life, it's like people show you so many sides of them that, you know what I mean? And I realized like, wow, like this is just a flesh suit I'm in, this was the one that I got divinely, it was the one that I'm a person of faith. So it's like, okay, like I was chosen to be in this flesh suit, and you have a flesh suit. And that's just, oh my gosh, that's just like only part of the thing,
Right.
But then it's like you talk to, like when I meet people going to school in the Midwest and meeting people who told me what it was like to live in a town with only like 300 people, and they had a farm, and it's like so different from my experience, and to realize that it's like these stories is about when we share them, I feel like identity gets reinforced when we crystallize for ourselves the value, and when you see the different dimensions sometimes side by side, and this is the part I love, you start to see these really interesting cross-cutting themes about who you are as a person. And then light bulbs go off, you know, and you don't realize like you're bringing stuff to work that you bring to your family, and that adds value. And I feel like, so you claim value, and then when you share the story, I feel like it's the Me Too's and the connection of being seen and heard, and other people, you know, being, you know, it's, I don't know. It's just, I feel like we miss out so much on if we actually started our meetings with maybe a place of where we take 10 or 15 minutes to know each other a little bit, right? Yeah.
So good. What is your favorite book, show / podcast, something or other about one of your identities that you love?
So my new one, because it's so funny, like I was an African American studies major, not an Asian American studies major. And then I studied some stuff. So for me, this area, especially in the time we live in now, right, with violence, discrimination, and just things coming to the forefront, I've been on the hunt for Asian American shows and podcasts. So on the podcast front, there is a podcast called Centering. And it is all about Asian American Christianity. And they're digging into some really cool stuff around, you know, again, helping Asian Americans dismantle and intersections of social justice, of mental health, of sexual orientation, all these things that Asian Americans have not really been too open and transparent about talking about. So I love being in there and playing there with the people. They're just crossing all these intersections, and then thinking about faith and what it all means. And then on the show front, okay, so for yucks and giggles, when I'm feeling, you know, when I need a media diet, you know, I was watching Fresh Off the Boat, and it was like replays of Fresh Off the Boat and seeing my own childhood experience from a different perspective through that show. And then this one is going to sound so corny, but I got to tell you, have you ever seen the movie Zootopia?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I've watched that several times in the last year and really realized how much more pertinent it is now in the time we live in, and in the way they're talking about things like microaggressions and stuff. And it's just so, and bringing out the gifts of these different animals, and, you know, you could just sub in.
Yep.
So for me, because I find, as somebody who is passionate about social justice, and I know you are too, Missy, that weariness, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about, you know, in circles, how do you preserve your peace, your energy, right? The burnout, the emotional labor, all of it.
Yeah.
And so humor is really big for me. So that's where I've been leaning a lot on humor that gets me to feel my humanity. And so Zootopia actually really, I have a couple one-liners I tell myself even from the movie.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much.
Yeah.
I'm especially fond of the sloth in that movie.
Me too. Oh my gosh, I love the sloths. I love them. Yeah.
I have a surprise question for you.
Okay.
What is your most favorite thing to eat?
Oh my gosh, you're killing me. It's so hard. I thought you were going to say object, in which I have to show you this. Rosa Parks Barbie.
Oh my God, stop it. That's
the only Barbie I've ever owned, because I hated dolls as a kid. My husband got that for Christmas 2 years ago. Oh, so she keeps me strong over here, so I'm looking at her all the time.
I love that.
So food wise, like, it's really hard for me to reduce, but there is an amazing, okay, this is terrible for being an environmentalist, but
it's okay. Go ahead.
All right. There's this very specific style of Japanese ramen called tsukemen ramen. And it has a slow cooked pork gravy. Like, they cook it over 60 hours. That's the part I feel bad about. Yeah. And instead of a soup, it's actually a three-stage experience. Okay. So what you do, like, yeah, it's literally an experience. And so you get a bowl of noodles by itself, you get the gravy, you take lime, you first you take lime and you sprinkle along the top and you eat the noodles just with the lime, and then you dip the lime and the noodles into the gravy and you eat it like that. And then the third, they pour hot water in and then it's a soup and then you wrap it up. So it's like you get noodles 3 ways.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And there's only one place and you got to trek like 45 minutes to go get it here. And when people come into town, it's pretty life-changing. I recommend it.
Awesome. That's amazing.
What's yours?
My favorite is chicken surprise. My mom created a recipe called chicken surprise, and you take a crescent roll.
Yeah.
And you make a mix of chicken breast, chives, and cream cheese, and melted butter, and then you mix it all up and you put it in the crescent roll and you wrap it up like a little
baby
bunting, like what do they call those things you get at the Asian like pot sticker thing. Anyway, you wrap them up
dumpling wrappers
in a little bun, like it's a little.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to make that.
Like,
oh my gosh.
And then you roll it in melted butter and breadcrumbs, and you bake it, and then you put cream of mushroom soup over it.
Oh my gosh, it's all my favorite fatty things in one thing. Oh.
I'll send you the recipe.
Please send me the recipe.
Yeah, my mom made it up.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask, I'm really curious for people who end up watching this, I would love if people would share in the comments, like, what are the different dimensions and funky combinations of you? Because
that's a great question. I love that. If people want to work with you or find you on the interwebs, where can they go?
They can go to stephaniezhong.com and they can join my newsletter there. I'm sharing some bi-weekly like stories, tips, and things like that. I am on LinkedIn these days, and I am more of a lurker and amplifier in Twitter. Like, I love to share offbeat stories there.
Awesome.
And yeah, and Instagram, I am Stephanie Zhong.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I love that you're doing this series.
Me too.
And I hope that we keep sparking these conversations to really just honor the fullness of ourselves, even if some of those collisions were painful, but have led to like really rich perspective and ways to connect with each other.
Me too.
Yes.
Thank you, darling. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. Take care.